Wild rumours and scattered scraps of information concerning the mounting discontent swirling amongst the upper echelons of Hive Primus continues to filter its way down into the congested backstreets of Hive City, passing along the ruined gantries and viaducts of Dust Falls, until eventually finding its way to the very depths of the underhive itself. And while the machinations and disagreements of the high and mighty tends to have little direct impact on the lives of those scratching out an existence amid the rotting detritus of the hive's underbelly, even the lowly souls inhabiting the twisted warrens of Sludge River City can't help but sense the growing tensions within the gilded halls of their ruling elite. This, combined with the increasing regularity of gang violence and the even more troubling occurrences of raids against guild merchants and their travelling caravans, has led the rich and powerful of the city to issue a none-too-subtle demand that the local enforcers either increase their security activities or cede the responsibility to those more willing and able to complete the task. For Sanction Watch Primus, their repeated failures and a growing list of disciplinary infractions has seen them dismissed from their usual duties, and instead they now find themselves banished to the very outskirts of the settlement, a damning indictment of the squad's worth in the eyes of their superiors. To add insult to injury, along with the obvious lack of faith in their abilities, they have also been saddled with the less than glamorous task of conducting routine inspections on the various trade caravans entering the city, as well as enforcing the increasingly restrictive limitations placed on unsanctioned transit into and out of the lower levels of the underhive. Following their abortive attempt at claiming a stash of newly uncovered archaeotech from deep within the bowels of a long-collapsed and sparsely explored dome, the remaining members of the Neo-Spider Nexus have spent the last few cycles picking their way back towards more familiar territory, avoiding, whenever possible, from coming into contact with the various gangs of scavies, dregs and other outcasts that are usually found in the more decrepit sections of the underhive. As they move nearer to their destination, the team begins to hear rumours of enforcer patrols in the local area, increasing in both frequency and brutality, while transit into and out of the zones surrounding the city's outskirts had become more heavily restricted, a situation that would pose a number of issues to the gang that they would no doubt have to deal with sooner rather than later. Based on the escape scenario from Gang War 4, the attackers, in this case the Neo-Spider Nexus, are attempting to escape the current area by breaking through a set of checkpoints guarded by the defenders, which for this scenario is Sanction Watch Primus. Members of the attacking gang do this by being unengaged and in base contact with either of the two doors located on the board edge opposite their deployment zone at the start of any end phase, and the defender's job is to make sure this doesn't happen. Additionally, to represent the urgent nature of the escape attempt, if any attacking fighters don't end their activations closer to one of the doors than they began it, they will need to pass a nerve check or become broken. There are no restrictions on crew selection, and the battle ends if either gang has no fighters left on the board at the end of a round. The attackers claim victory if at least 3 of their fighters manage to escape, otherwise the win goes to the defenders. Lastly, each attacker that escapes earns themselves an additional point of experience and a point of reputation for their gang, while if the defender ensures no attackers escape, they earn D3 points to reputation. The board is set up with 2 escape points located along the defender's board edge. Each gang may deploy their fighters within 6 inches of their own edge, ensuring that each is at least 12 inches from the central line of the board. If either gang has fighters with the infiltration skill, they may set them up anywhere on the board at least 6 inches from an enemy fighter and out of line of sight. Finally, there are 4 loot crates located at various points across the battlefield. These may be accessed by performing an open or smash action while within 1 inch of a crate. Sanction Watch Primus begin the battle with 2 fighters guarding each of the escape points located along their board edge, while Salus and the 2 remaining members of the squad set up within the guard post. The Neo-Spider Nexus deploy their fighters from the 2 entrances into the zone on their side of the board, with Coldfire, Alsander and Jerome taking up a position to the left, and Obadiah and Svard entering from the right. Needing to get past the enforcers as quickly as possible, Drone heads left, avoiding the central market in favour of advancing down the flank. Aware of the Van Saar heading their way, Scott marches out onto the observation deck and spots one of the gangers entering the zone. Aiming his grenade launcher towards the figure, he fires off a frag round, but the grenade flies wildly off target before exploding harmlessly in the distance. Ignoring the blast behind him, Alsander follows Jerome to the left, getting himself out of sight of the enforcer who just fired in their general direction. Directing Solomon forward, Eves covers the patrolman as he moves towards the storage container, before following up to take a position behind the veteran enforcer. Not wanting to hang around, Saar leaves the stack of crates he'd been using for cover, and sprints for the protection of the Rockcrete platform ahead of him. Ordering Branwen to take up a position covering the central market, Cauldron waits for the enforcer to get into place before making his own way to the opposite corner of the Rockcrete platform. With Saar having already moved, Obadiah sets off down the right, plasma gun raised and at the ready as he keeps an eye out for any roving enforcers. Having finally been cleared for active duty, Frost sprints from the guard post and towards the set of stairs leading down to the ground floor. Hoping to draw the attention of the enforcers, Coldfire moves towards the marketplace, taking what cover he can behind a set of battered and rusting barrels. With his squad deployed, Talus emerges onto the deck, catching sight of a Van Saar ganger advancing into the market. Shouldering his concussion carbine, he takes aim at the enemy fighter and pulls the trigger. The weapon kicks as it fires, but the shot falls short, the blast failing to catch the opponent or even force him to take cover. With the Neo-Spider Nexus advancing into the zone and Sanction Watch Primus moving to intercept them, little in the way of combat takes place, meaning both gangs remain at full strength and ready to go. Barking out orders, Talus directs Scott to join him as he moves over to the platform's edge. Lifting his concussion carbine, he again aims towards the Van Saar, sighting down the length of his gun and squeezing the trigger. This time though, the blast catches his target, and the concussive force sends the ganger staggering back and off his feet. With the enemy knocked prone, Scott moves up behind Talus and, levelling his own weapon, lines up a shot. Firing, he sends a frag grenade flying towards the ganger, who cries out as he's struck by a burst of shrapnel, several pieces managing to cut through his armour in multiple places. Ears ringing and body rebelling at the numerous wounds he'd just taken, Coldfire scrambles to his feet and limps over to the safety of a large metal barricade. Stepping from behind the platform, Cauldron sees a Van Saar rushing down the flank, and without missing a beat, raises his bolt gun and aims at the approaching figure. Firing off a burst, he watches the gangers step aside at the last moment as the explosive rounds crash harmlessly into the wall next to him. Ignoring the bolter rounds hammering into the rockcrete around him, Obadiah continues rushing forwards, closing the distance to the enforcer who just stepped into view. Without slowing, he shoulders his plasma gun and aims the weapon towards the figure ahead of him. Firing on the run, he sends a bolt of energy slamming into the enforcer, the blow knocking him from his feet but failing to cut through his thick armour. Watching from the top of the stairs, Frost sees Cauldron open up on an unseen foe, before suddenly staggering back as a blast of plasma slams into him. Swearing under his breath, the rookie dashes down the stairs, passing Branwen and skidding to a halt just short of the platform corner. With Coldfire hunkering down in the market, Saar moves to join him, skirting the barricade and getting into position behind a pile of armoured crates. With the Van Saar now entering the market, Branwen rounds the corner and heads towards a set of barrels, getting into place to cut off their advance. Hearing the fighting kicking off to the right, Alsander continues forwards, leapfrogging Jeroen's position and working his way along the side of the battered storage container. Looking to get to higher ground, Eves climbs up onto the platform and heads for the central column, leaning out and spotting one of the Van Saar moving below. Snapping his bolter into position and bracing himself against the pillar, he takes aim at the slowly approaching figure. Firing off a short burst, he watches the first few rounds flash wide before the last hammers home, piercing the Van Saar's armour and collapsing him to the deck in a spray of blood. As Alsander rushes past, Jeroen hears the unmistakable crump of bolter fire, followed by a sharp cry of agony. Spinning around the container, she rushes up to the now prone subtech and quickly checks his vitals. Satisfied that he'd live, Jeroen glances around and quickly spots the enforcer who'd taken the shot. Aiming her weapon at the figure above, she fires off a short salvo in his general direction, more in the hopes of keeping his head down than in actually landing a hit. Looking to support Eves, Solomon clambers up the ladder and into cover next to him as plasma rounds zip past them from the Van Saar below. While both gangs have come under fire, only Alsander has ended up suffering any injuries, though it's not enough to break the Neo-Spider Nexus's nerve and they continue to push on towards the exits. Despite Jeroen's assistance, Alsander fails to stem the bleeding from the wounds inflicted by the bolt round, though together they are able to avoid making the situation any worse. Shifting to his left, Obadiah lines up on the Enforcer lying in front of him and fires. The plasma round punches into the man's torso and through his armour, causing his body to shudder violently before falling still, acrid smoke rising from the charred site of the round's impact. Passing on a set of instructions, Eves waits as Solomon moves around the pillar and up to the platform's edge, before levelling his shotgun at the two Vansar gangers beneath him. As the weapon roars to life, shredder ammo catches both targets, but only manages to penetrate the armour of the already downed fighter, inflicting additional injuries and forcing the other Vansar to duck away from the blast. At the same time, Eves levels his bolter at the uninjured ganger and fires, the weapon kicking violently in his grip as it jams after the first shot. Luckily, one round is all it takes to punch through the Vansar's armour, sending the fighter crashing down to the deck. Stepping forwards, Saar takes aim at the Enforcer who'd moved to cut off their advance, firing a burst of las bolts and landing at least one solid hit. Though the lawman's armour does hold, the impact is still enough to force him to drop down and take cover. With gunfire erupting to his left, Salas changes position until he is able to line up a shot at the Vansar taking aim at Branwyn. Assessing the situation, he fires at the ganger, hitting him and blowing him from his feet, but despite the force of the blast, the enemy's armour holds, leaving him prone but otherwise unhurt. Despite the vicious wound caused by the bolt round, Jeroen gets back to her feet and levels her own weapon at the Enforcer standing above her. She fires off a single blast of plasma that crunches into her target, knocking him from his feet as the supercharged energy blows through his armour and chews a burning hole in his torso. Getting back to his feet, Branwyn takes a moment to gather his wits before taking aim at the prone Vansar ahead of him. Firing off a shredder round, he's amazed to see the enemy fighter emerge from the blast unscathed, with not a single projectile managing to land a solid hit. Slapping a stim patch in place, Coldfire makes his way into the middle of the market stalls, reaching a point where he can draw a bead on the Enforcer hunkering down to his right. Firing a burst of plasma, he watches in disbelief as the man's armour shrugs off the impact, the only effect of the solid hit being to force his target to once again hit the deck. Desperate to offer aid to Cauldron, Frost moves to his side, raising his stub gun and taking a snapshot at the Vansar standing mere feet away. Despite being at such close range, Frost's shot only manages to wing his target, but the near miss does cause the man to stumble from his feet. Groaning from the pain lancing through his body, Alsander can do little more than crawl slowly forwards. With the Vansar continuing to push on, Scott shifts to the centre of the observation deck and turns his attention to the ganger firing from within the market stalls. Judging the distance, he attempts to drop a frag grenade on top of his enemy's head, but despite his best efforts, his shot flies wide, blasting apart sections of the market but leaving the Vansar unscathed. Struggling against the pain radiating from the plasma burns, Cauldron pulls himself into a position behind Frost and begins furiously working on his wounds. With the intensity of the fighting ratcheting up, both the Neo-Spider Nexus and Sanction Watch Primus have started to suffer injuries, though so far, neither has had a member taken out of the fight. So while both gangs have been bloodied, both are still determined to continue. At the second time of asking, Alsander, with Jeroen's support, is able to patch up his wound, meaning the young subtech can re-enter the fight. On the platform above, Solomon isn't so lucky, and despite his efforts, the Enforcer ends up succumbing to his wounds. Across the battlefield, Cauldron manages to avoid a similar fate, and with Frost lending a hand, is able to pump himself with enough stims to keep going. With the two Enforcers in front of him otherwise occupied, Obadiah gets to his feet and raises his weapon, pulling the trigger and pumping a burst of plasma rounds into the unsuspecting pair. The superheated energy eats through their armour and flesh alike, leaving both Enforcers sprawled on the deck, smoke rising from multiple areas of charred and blackened skin. Hearing the distinctive sound of plasma fire coming from the left flank, Salas knows he needs to deal with the Vansar ahead of him as quickly as possible, and shouldering his carbine, he aims towards the centre of the market. Firing, he watches the concussive blast slam into the stalls, splintering crates and bending metal as it catches the Van Saar. Yet somehow, despite being flung from his feet, the ganger remains unscathed. Shaking up the wreckage and debris of the ruined market, Svard clambers to his feet and aims up at the enforcer he'd just fired. Steadying himself, he lets loose a burst of lasbills which slam into his target, burning through their armour and spinning them from their feet, leaving the enforcer sprawled out on the deck. In spite of this, Svard's nerves begin to fray, and he finds himself retreating from the market and back towards the safety of a large metal barricade. With the central market area mostly under control, Scott shifts his attention back to the right, getting an update from Eves as he moves towards the far edge of the platform. Taking a moment to judge the angles, he launches a frag grenade, aiming to drop it onto the heads of the two Van Saars advancing down the flank. To his satisfaction, the shot lands exactly where it needs to, and the lethal blast catches both enemies, inflicting further damage on the already wounded fighter and forcing the other to duck down, their nerves finally breaking as they begin crawling for cover. Barely conscious and almost overwhelmed with pain, Alsander desperately crawls after Jerome, hoping that the medic eventually comes to her senses before it's too late. Voxing his thanks to Scott, Eve sets about trying to fix his jammed weapon, which, as it turns out, is easier said than done. Shaken and dazed by the multiple blasts set off around him, Coldfire struggles back to his feet and tries to aim at the prone figure of the enforcer off to his right. But he somehow manages to miss what should have been an easy shot, and the plasma bolt goes wide of the mark, leaving him standing unsteadily in the middle of the mostly destroyed market. Glancing at the still smouldering crater in the rockreat above his head, Branwyn whispers a brief prayer to the Emperor before clambering back to his feet. Shouldering his shotgun, he takes aim at the Van Saar now standing amongst the ruined remnants of the market and fires. The blast from the shredder round engulfs the figure, blowing through their battered armour and causing puffs of blood to fill the air as the Van Saar collapses on top of a stack of crates, his body eventually going limp and still. Despite Obadiah sending both Caldron and Frost to join Solomon on the sidelines, Sanction Watch Primus manages to hold their nerve as they consolidate their control over the central market. But the same can't be said for the Neo-Spider Nexus, with the loss of Coldfire shattering their resolve and causing the injured Alsander to flee the field, leaving only 3 members of the gang to continue pushing onwards. With his gun still jammed, Eves continues trying to clear the mechanism, but the weapon stubbornly refuses to release its hold on the twisted shell casing wedged inside. As the sound of fighting begins dying away, Obadiah knows the only way they're getting past the enforcers is if he clears the way himself. Taking a breath, he readies his gun and spins around the corner, heading for the stairs leading to the enforcer's observation deck. As he reaches them, he glances left, spotting an enforcer, and snaps off a quick burst of plasma in their direction. But even with his knack of hitting targets on the move, the bolt flashes well wide and only succeeds in drawing the enemy's attention. Blindsided by the bolt of plasma vaporizing a section of rockcrete inches from his head, Branwyn turns to find one of the enemy rushing up the stairs behind him. Swearing, he darts back towards the Van Saar and, racking his shotgun, aims and fires a burst of shredder rounds in their direction. The spread catches the quickly moving target, causing him to stumble and trip over the lower steps as his armoured bolt comes sliding to a stop. Taking a breath to settle his nerves, Svard forces himself back towards the market, dropping in behind one of the few remaining intact pieces of cover. Standing up, Salas swings towards the Van Saar now lying slumped on the stairs beneath him, and raising his carbine, fires at the prone figure. Unfortunately, his aim is off, and the concussive blast fails to do much in the way of damage to the ganger. Having just about regained her composure, Jerome gets up and moves back along the side of the container, being more careful to keep her progress hidden from the enforcers this time around. Happy that the enemy approaching from the right were dealt with, Scott steps back over to Salas, and seeing the Van Saar at the foot of the stairs, levels his grenade launcher. But just like his captain, Scott's shot is off target, and the grenade does more damage to the surrounding steps than it does to the hapless enemy fighter. With at least one member of the Van Saar gang having managed to get in behind them, Sanction Watch Primus' resolve finally cracks, but Salas' iron will holds the team firm and keeps them all committed to the fight. As for the Neo-Spider Nexus, while Jerome and Saar managed to hold their nerve, Obadiah, having seen his attempted assault on the Enforcer position fail, decides to call it a day and hastily flees the field. Judging the situation, and with over half the team now out of action or having fled the field, Jerome sees little point in persisting in their attempts to break through the checkpoint, and so, with a short comms burst to Saar, she orders their retreat. With the Saar having collected their wounded and fled like the irradiated scum wasters they were, Salas and the rest of the squad, minus those currently undergoing treatment for their injuries, looked over the marketplace with a sense of grim satisfaction. It had been a hard-fought engagement, but one Salas was glad they'd faced. It was good for the squad to taste victory, especially after their recent run of luck. And, if the Emperor willed it, and this success were to catch the attention of the Precinct Proctor, then maybe, just maybe, they'd be able to get themselves out of this derelict hell pit and back to the streets of Sludge River City where they belonged. Though they ended the battle victorious, Sanction Watch Primus earned a fairly modest amount of experience, with only Branwyn managing to take one of the enemy fighters out of action. On the plus side, they did gain a very respectable 60 credits in loot and 2 points of reputation, as well as claiming a new territory in the Stinger Mold Sprawls. Against this, they suffered 3 lasting injuries, with Caldron and Frost both picking up a hand injury, and Solomon being left with an old battle wound for his troubles. As for the Neo-Spider Nexus, apart from Obadiah and Jerome, the entire endeavour was barely worth the effort, with only 20 credits being picked up and their reputation remaining as low as it can get. Adding insult to injury, their leader suffered a head injury that will unfortunately keep him out of their next engagement. For Sanction Watch Primus, the post-battle process turned out to be extremely productive, with a new rookie recruited from the precinct to replace the retiring Frost, and the Stinger Mold Sprawl territory allowing Cauldron's hand injury to be changed to an out cold result. 4 members of the squad were also able to purchase advancements, with Eves, Cauldron and Branwyn all improving their ballistic skill, while Solomon was blessed by the Dice Gods with an improvement to his willpower. The Neo-Spider Nexus also benefited from the time away from the battlefield, with a new subtech joining them from their settlement, and Obadiah spending the experience he'd earned in order to improve his toughness. And that brings us to the end of another battle report. We hope you've enjoyed it, and if you've made it this far, make sure to click the like button, and maybe leave a comment. And if you're not already, why not subscribe? It's free and it really helps the channel. Thank you, as always, for watching.